Gotho-Germanic tribes have inhabited Denmark since prehistoric times. A seafaring people, the Danes played an important role in the era of Viking exploration and raid in Western Europe, from 800 to 1050 AD. The Viking era is probably the most predominant thing of the early Danish history, but since this is supposed to be a more simplified version of the histories of these countries, I'm not going to go deeply into it, and if you want to learn more about the Viking era, I recommend watching other people's videos that are longer and more in-depth. I'll continue. The Vikings were predominant among the invaders of England in the early 11th century, and the Danes pretty much defined the English as we know today, as well as the French and the Normans, but the Danes were the first. Christianity was first introduced in 826 by King Harold Bluetooth, who reigned from 935 to 985, and he was the first Dutch monarch to become a Christian. Christianity became widespread during the 11th century, during which time also the power of the Danes increased. Danish kings ruled over Denmark, England, Norway, and southern Sweden. After a period of turmoil and civil war, Denmark reigned its powerful position in the north in 1397, when Denmark, Norway, Sweden, Finland, the Faroe Islands, Iceland, and Greenland were all brought together in the Kalmar Union, which was a power. But it was mainly under the Danish crown, and it was not very strong for long. In 1520, Sweden and Finland revolted, seceding from the Union in 1523. In 1536, the Reformation brought about the establishment of a national Lutheran church. In the following century, Denmark participated in the 30 Years' War, which was from 1618 to 48, as a champion of Protestantism. In 1658, under the Treaty of Roskilde, the Swedes forced the Danes to give up the provinces on the southern Swedish mainland. This was the time when Denmark was isolated to the Jutland Peninsula and the islands that hold Copenhagen and westward. The 1700s was a period of internal reform, including the abolition of serfdom and land reforms. At the Congress of Vienna in 1815, at the end of the Napoleonic Wars, Norway was taken from Denmark and came under the control of Sweden. The Danish liberal movement in the early 1800s succeeded in making Denmark a constitutional monarchy in 1849. And then after the 1864 war against Prussia and Austria, Denmark was forced to secede its southernmost province of Holstein, the southern area of Jutland, to the Danes, to Prussia, and adopt a policy of neutrality going forward. Despite these territorial losses, Denmark prospered economically in the 19th century and in the latter part of the 1800s. Denmark began important social reforms, laying the basis for the present state. During World War I, Denmark maintained neutrality, yet at the war's end, the upper part of the Holstein area, southern Jutland, which Denmark previously lost to Prussia, returned back to Denmark following a plebiscite, and the present southern border with Germany was established in 1920. In 1933, great social reforms were instituted, beginning Denmark's modern welfare state. However, despite its neutrality during the Second World War, Denmark was invaded by the Nazis from the south in 1940 and was defeated in under a day, and was occupied until its liberation by the British in May of 1945. The Nazis invaded Denmark mainly to get an area to invade Norway from, which would stop Allied goods and take the Norwegian heavy water production into its own hands. Denmark's influence extends beyond the Baltic and Northern Europe. Iceland and Greenland have been governed by Denmark since the Viking era, and it's why Denmark does not want to sell it to the United States, among many other reasons that are all very valid. The Faroe Islands passed to Denmark in 1380. In the latter half of the 1600s, the Danes claimed to colonize the islands of St. John and St. Thomas in the West Indies. They purchased St. Croix from France in 1733. These islands became known as the Danish West Indies. Though, in 1917, Denmark sold their Danish West Indies islands to the United States, which are now known as the U.S. Virgin Islands, right after the First World War, In 1918, Denmark recognized Iceland as a sovereign state united with Denmark under a common king. Iceland became fully independent from Denmark, though, in 1944, following the German occupation of mainland Denmark and then the British occupation of Iceland. The Faroe Islands received home rule in 1948, and Greenland became an integral part of Denmark under a new constitution of 1953 and received home rule in 1979. Both now have local government, and each has 2 representatives in parliament. The last things I will talk about, which aren't very big, is the fact that Denmark is in many European programs, such as the European Community, NATO, which was one of the first nations, EU, which might be the same thing, among other things such as the Schengen area. But that is it for the main history of Denmark. Now on to the fun facts. The first fact is, as many people know, Denmark has the oldest continuous flag in the entire world. So out of every country that is on this planet right now, the flag of Denmark is the oldest continuous flag out of all of them, which is kind of crazy. The second fact is that Denmark, similarly to the Netherlands, is very known for being very flat and having absolutely 0 mountains. Thus, the highest point of the entire country, not including the Faroe Islands or Greenland, most people wouldn't even recognize as being the highest point of the nation, because it just looks like the rest of the nation. The third fact is that Denmark is actually the 2nd largest country in Europe by land area, and it shares a border with Canada, making both Denmark and Canada border 2 countries. This is all due to the fact that Greenland is an integral part of the Danish state. The fourth fact is, the Danish monarchy is the oldest monarchy in the entire world, with over 1,000 years of near uninterrupted history. And the last fact is the developers of the Bluetooth technology, as many people know, struggled to come up with a name, so they based it off of the historic unifier of Denmark, Herald Bluetooth, which I did cover a tiny bit in this video already. Anyways, that is it for the simplified history of Denmark.